Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Desert Leadership. Our topic today is managing conflict in the workplace, and we're glad you're here. Appreciate everybody who showed up. We will be getting started here in just a second. Wanted to let you know that we are keeping everybody in silent mode, but you can submit questions at any point using the GoToWebinar question platform, so we encourage you to do that. Our presenter today is Melissa Charles. She's the owner and CEO of Desert Leadership. And Melissa has over 24 years of experience in sales and retail and spent years building her skills in sales, auditing, customer service, and management. She has started Desert Leadership with her father, Jeff Charles, who's the president, and they focus on coaching, training, employee development, and leadership as well. So, with all that being said, again, I encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation, but we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll be doing questions and answers at the end. So, Melissa, if you are ready, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Doug, for that introduction. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody's time today. So let's go ahead and get started talking about managing conflict in the workplace. Our objectives today are why conflict happens within the workplace, the two types of conflict, disruptive and constructive, and managing and preventing conflict. So why does conflict happen? When you think about it, do you think about your working environment? Do you have conflict going on, and why is that happening? I know when I think about conflict, I just think about the diverse group of people that are in different organizations and really start to think about why conflict happens. And basically conflict happens because we engage in social interaction with people that have different backgrounds, different goals, different values than we do. And because of that, that can create conflict. Now, what is conflict? I decided we need to go ahead and kind of define that a little bit, and what the definition of conflict is: it's real or perceived threat or opposition to one's needs, interests, principles, concerns, or security. And it just really comes down to people start to feel like their needs are being threatened. And so that brings about feelings within that person that make them uncomfortable. So when we identify some of the causes of organizational conflict, of course, we look on the screen and we see that conflict's in the center of everything, and there's many factors that play into that. One of the biggest factors that I have found is change brings about a lot of conflict. And with change, there's just a lot of lack of clear roles and responsibilities. People become confused as to what their roles really are, or how they might be changing because the organization decides there needs to be some changes that go on. And so they become uncertain of what their role is in that. You have different priorities. There's competition and diversity built into that. Everybody walks into a position with a clear priority for themselves and really where they're wanting to go and what they're wanting to do. And of course, with change, different priorities does happen, so conflict starts to rear its ugly head. Poor communication. This is one of the things that I see more and more in organization is just the lack of good communication. There's a disconnect between the managers, the supervisors, and the staff. People just become very unsure of what they're trying to do or what they're supposed to do, and they're not able to communicate that in an effective manner. Weak consensus. With weak consensus, there is just an inadequate processes and procedures that goes on, and people just don't understand what the processes really are, maybe because they're changing, or what the procedures are because they just don't understand maybe the way they're written or what they're supposed to be doing. And unfortunately, people don't like to ask questions because they feel like, I don't want to be the only one in the room with a question. Next is conflicting goals. And with conflicting goals, this is really where you have a lot of power plays in action, because people have goals that they're trying to achieve. When they walk into a position, they have maybe a timeline of what they're wanting to do, what they're wanting to achieve, and where they're wanting to go. And everybody's goals are a little bit different. So of course, because of that difference, there is going to be situations that arise that will result in conflict. And the last thing would be assumptions. Again, with assumption, it's just a lack of clarity and definition. People are making assumptions to what really should be going on instead of just trying to understand what they're actually being told. So do any of these sound like things that are going on within your organization? I know for me in my past organizations, I could probably tell you there's probably all of them that are going on. Poor communication and change has been two of the major ones that I have witnessed throughout. Now, why does conflict happen? What are some of the things that could cause it? I define three things, and I think these are pretty big issues that could cause conflict to start happening between individuals. Individuals differ in their perception of an issue or a situation. People desire different outcomes. One person doesn't feel listened to or understood by another. And that the last one is a really big one, because sometimes people are very timid in even standing up and having their voice listened to. So when they do actually speak up and they feel like they're not getting the recognition that they deserve, this could start bringing up feelings of not being welcomed into the environment, or like their worth means anything. Now this brings us to disruptive conflict, and this is probably the biggest kind of conflict that's happening in most organizations. As you'll see, I've got competition, self-interest, a win-lose approach, closed work environment, defensive communication, and personal attacks are all things that happen when you have a disruptive situation. Conflict often feels uncomfortable because it stirs up emotional reactions that can be hard to deal with. The disconnect comes from negative emotions, which are triggered because the conflict pushes hot buttons within each one of us. To navigate conflict effectively, you have to know what your hot buttons are so that you're able to disconnect that link between your feelings and the behavior. And again, that's really the huge situation, because unfortunately with disruptive conflict, that tends to bring about personal attacks, because people take it personally instead of realizing the situation is about the environment or a particular task or particular assignment that the team or the organization has, and they take it personally and they make it about individuals when it really doesn't need to go there. 85% of U.S. employees experience conflict and spend about 2.8 hours a week dealing with that conflict. And 2.8 hours a week per employee, that is a lot of hours spent dealing with disruptive conflict. 359 billion in paid hours a year that are lost on productivity and resources because of conflict that's happening within that environment. 31% of managers think that they handle conflict effectively, while 78% of the employees disagree. And that in itself just says a lot, because how are the managers honestly handling the conflict that they believe that they're really resolving the issue, while 78% of their employees are disagreeing with that? And that's just one of the huge disconnects that we are seeing. 27% of employees witness personal attacks, and 25% saying avoiding it results in sickness and absences. And I know personally I've dealt with a lot of disruptive conflict, and it's kind of an ugly thing to deal with. I know myself, I have been involved in several situations that got out of control pretty rapidly because people take things personally when it shouldn't be taken there. The short of the story really is that basically I decided to take my working relationship with my manager and I decided to make it a personal one. And unfortunately, when that happened, our working relationship changed. Expectations started to change, only I wasn't really aware of a lot of the changes. It was just assumed that I knew. And it really brought about some ugliness, and it made it very uncomfortable. I would have to say for both of us, but it made it very uncomfortable for me because it became an issue of wondering, walking on pins and needles every day, wondering how the situation was going to unfold. And it really became a situation where I started to not want to go to work. So I was pretending like I was sick. I was, to not deal with the situation, and the stress, it ends up making you sick. So it really is a situation where I wish that I knew back then what I know today, because if I did, I would have been able to handle the situation way more effectively than I did. And I really believe that with that knowledge, I would have been able to turn it around to where we at least could have gotten on an even playing field, and we both could have heard each other out and made the best of the situation instead of making it a horrible situation for everyone involved. Now, constructive conflict is really kind of the best kind of conflict that you want to have in your organization, because you're always going to have a level of conflict, but with constructive conflict, it really is giving you the opportunity to be able to work together to come to a good result. When you've got constructive conflict, you've got cooperation. You have a collective focus on what the issues are instead of making it personal. You have a win-win approach instead of a win-lose approach. You focus on the issues. You open with an open work environment, so you're able to have communication, and you have supportive communication. Instead of it being a situation where you've got people taking opposing views and competitive actions, the viewpoints become more focused, and you're able to work together to find a resolution to whatever the issue or issues are. When I was going through the material for the webinar, I ran across this quote, and I just love this quote because it really says so much. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict, alternatives to passive or aggressive responses, alternatives to violence. And to me, that just really says a lot, because really, you've got to find creative alternatives to resolving the conflicts that happen within the workplace. And if you are willing to do that, you're willing to be open to both sides of things, you can pretty much solve any situation. No one's saying that everybody's going to agree on every point all the time, but the key is saying, I have my point of view, you have yours, but together we're going to create a solution that's going to work best for everyone. Now, managing conflict. It's important to find an underlying principle or common principle that you and your peer can agree on. And what I found is that there are 6 keys to managing the conflicts within any kind of workplace or even personally. First thing is you've got to define the problem. You've got to walk in your peer's shoes. Try to understand their point of view, their motivation, their reaction to the conflict. Try and get them to give you examples to clarify the issues, rephrase, restate, and summarize what you've heard from them. Focus on the other person's words and behaviors rather than your own assumptions. Then examine the flaws within your position. And that's really key, and I think one of the hardest things that we as individual people have a hard time doing is that we full-heartedly believe that our position is the right position. And so we're not open to listening to other viewpoints. And we have to kind of rise above that and realize that in any situation, we have to be willing to hear another person's viewpoint on it. It doesn't mean that they're going to agree, but it does mean that I'm going to listen to you, you're going to listen to me, and we're going to be open to working things together. The next is to look for options and different perspectives. When you're open to another person's interpretation of a situation, other perspectives come into play, and you're able to kind of go, wow, that's kind of a good idea. I didn't think about that. Then when you're closed off, you're not willing to listen to anybody's opinions, anybody's ideas on anything. The next would be to create a solution together. Look for points of mutual agreement and interdependence. Begin with less complicated issues. Then work towards resolving the difficult ones. So if there's more than one issue that's arising, you want to work on the smaller things that you know that you can accomplish. And the ones that are going to be a little more difficult, make those the last, because that way you can get all the little silliness out of the way and really focus on the heart of the matter. Select a solution or select several solutions that you both or all of you can agree upon, and that best fits everyone's needs. Then you're going to evaluate the solution. You're going to pick one solution that works best for everybody. So if you've got 2 or 3, there's going to be some conversation. There's going to be some mulling over with everybody as to which one's best going to fit the solution to this, and then pick that one. Then what you want to do is learn from your experience, reflect and understand. Note your initial reaction to the conflict and analyze why that reaction happened. Consider the impact of differences in the style and the opinions between you and your peers. Really sit back, look at what happened and why it happened, and think about different ways that maybe you could have communicated things differently. It's not just about the other person, but it's about you as well. You have to look at yourself and decide, in this situation, you know, I could have been a little bit more clear on what I was saying, and I didn't need to act a certain way when they came at me with this. What I should have done is realized it's not about me, it's about the situation. And if you do that, you can come up with something that you both or you all can agree upon, and that you can walk away thinking, wow, we just made a really great breakthrough. Now, reasons for managing organizational conflict. I've listed the main ones that I think are just really huge and can be kind of costly to the organization. And we basically want to minimize or eliminate one or all of these. Wasted time. That's probably one of the hugest things, and I'm sure everyone here can agree that there's a lot of wasted time when conflict erupts. And of course, in the organization's eyes, time is money. Organizations pay their employees for their time. And if it's wasted, then they've wasted not only time but money. You know, an example of this really would be, let's say you have a team of 6 people. And let's say every day before their shift actually starts, they spend an hour in a team meeting. And they spend about half of that time arguing unproductively about just different things. So when you think about it, instead of working together to discuss whatever they have ahead of them for the day, they're wasting about 3 person hours each day on conflict that doesn't need to transpire. So when you think about that, it's really kind of a huge amount of time that's being wasted when working together can solve a lot of issues. Reduced decision quality. This again is another huge situation where You know, decisions are made by the key employees and managers, and they have significant financial consequences. When you have a decision that needs to be made, and let's say it's being made by 2 or more people that are embroiled in unresolved conflict, the decision that's going to come out is not in the best interest of anybody involved, because there's so much conflict. People are making decisions based on something that maybe somebody else said or anger that they have over the situation. And so, again, you're going to have a seriously flawed outcome. Loss of valuable employees. This is another huge thing that I do see a lot, is the loss of employees that are key to an organization, and they end up leaving because of conflict. You know, organizations invest a lot of time in the employees' skills with training and, of course, their salaries. And what we have found is that when this was analyzed, about 50% of the people that had exit interviews were showing that unresolved conflict was their huge deciding factor in why they were leaving the company. You know, and conflict accounts for up to about 90% of involuntary terminations, because they can't figure out a way to resolve the conflict. Either a manager doesn't want to resolve it, or a manager is afraid to tackle it, or employees just can't get along for whatever the reason, and nobody wants to try and really just deal with the main situation. Sabotage is another one that we probably don't think a whole lot about, but it does happen. Studies have shown that there is a direct connection from employee conflict and the amount of damage, theft to inventory and equipment that does happen. You know, covert sabotage also happens with work processes, and often occurs when employees feel angry towards their employers, which, you know, if you step back and you think in your organization, are these things that are actually happening to your company now? Another issue is the health costs. You think about when you have somebody that's just not wanting to deal with going to work, or the effects of conflict, the stress involved. You're going to the doctor more. Things are coming up. People are getting sick because of all this negativity that's going on. And it makes the healthcare costs rise for the organization as well. Tips for handling conflict. Unfair fighting is kind of a lot that you'll see in your disruptive conflict. You've got blaming. Too many issues are happening. Bad timing. People are being threatened and given ultimatums. And then, of course, the escalation process. Versus if you have constructive conflict, you've kind of got a fair playing field. You're able to state what the problem is. You're able to reduce or eliminate the personal threats, because it's not about the individual, it's about the situation. You can find common ground to stand on. You stick to one issue at a time till you resolve each one of the issues at hand. Evaluate alternatives. And at the end, you can come to an agreement or counter proposal, or you postpone it until you're able to have a normal, calm conversation with the other individual that's involved in the conflict. Preventing conflict. The keys to preventing conflict, they're simple to say, but in reality, they're difficult to achieve at times. The biggest thing is to be open and willing to communicate in an effective manner. We have to remember that while we are working, it's about the organization, it's about their goals, and that's what counts. We can't put ourselves first, because when we do that, that just makes the situation a whole lot worse. Organizational goals are what we together are looking to achieve, and that's really what we're, as individuals for an organization, are paid for, to perform a job to the best of our abilities so that the organization is achieving their goals. Creating an environment to reduce conflict. And again, I kind of just tried to hit upon things that stood out for any organization that I've been a part of. Involve your employees in the organization with the changes and the decisions. You'll find that if you are able to include the employees and you are able to make sure that they understand every step of the way what's going on and why it's going on, then you're able to get a collective unit, and people aren't feeling like, I might lose my job, I might not have this job, I might be forced to do another job. Their needs are not being threatened. Improve communication. Develop sensitivity to a chronic employee conflict. Acknowledge the conflict honestly. Don't hide from it. Make sure that you're dealing with it head on. Improve access to information. Reduce role ambiguity. Develop standard procedures for managing conflict. And make sure that everybody understands that when conflict happens, it doesn't need to be a horrible situation. People are not alike, and everybody's viewpoint is going to be a little different. And that's what makes everything interesting. If we were all the same, it would probably get pretty boring. Provide support and team awards for assignments that are getting completed. Eliminate extremes and work overloads, underloads, and misunderstandings. A lot of times what I've seen is that when you have a team, there's always 2 or 3 people that a manager will lean upon more than somebody else, just because maybe they're faster or they're just a little bit better at the position than other people are. And so they tend to rely on them more so than somebody else. And that is like a #1 thing that employees see, and they start to think, well, why is Sally getting all the work and I'm not getting anything? Or my load is just very low and I never get to do any of the stuff that she's doing. So that starts to create a lot of animosity between myself and Sally, because she's getting all the recognition and all the work and I'm just kind of sitting there twiddling my thumbs. So that can kind of, in a situation, create a lot of unresolved feelings there. Some great phrases that I happen to love. The first one is, lack of trust stops conversations, and it's true. Build open and productive professional relationships, and personal relationships will flourish. Nothing complicates conflict resolution faster than sharing your feelings. And that's really true, because when you share too much of what you know, that can cause a lot of problems. You don't always have to share everything you're feeling with somebody, because it just kind of muddies the waters. You don't want to do that. So they're great kind of takeaways to think about, and I know that these 3 always make me think about situations and how I can always do something better when you're dealing with a personal or professional relationship. Okay, I thank you guys for listening, and I appreciate your time. I believe now we have time for questions. Brian, do we have any questions?
Yes, Melissa, this is actually Doug.
Okay.
We do have that have come in. So let me, again, thank you everybody that's joined us, and we're glad you're here. Please submit any questions that you have via the question window here on GoToWebinar. We would appreciate that. We'll get to your questions here in just a minute. But our first question we've had already is, the first question was, do you have any suggestions for dealing with conflict caused by passive-aggressive behavior?
Really, with conflict of that nature, what you really have to do is I know for me, I like to kind of try and step away from the situation for a time, maybe not approach it right then and there, so I can try and figure out how I can effectively communicate with somebody. And sometimes in that situation, you're not going to be able to do that, so that's where you're going to have to get someone else involved, maybe a manager or maybe your supervisor, because sometimes a person that's not involved in the situation can kind of bring the situation down to a normal area. You know, if you've got a lot of aggression going on, then sometimes it's just best to get someone else involved, walk away, figure out what it is exactly that you were trying to accomplish, and walk into the situation with a more open mind.
Well, yeah, and this question also is about passive aggressive. People that are passive aggressive, what's the best way to deal with that?
You know, again, I have found that sometimes, you know, and I say this because I've kind of dealt with it, is that you have to kind of, I like to walk away from situations for a minute and kind of just look at what was really going on, whether it's you know, somebody's wording or the way that they are kind of projecting themselves, and try and figure out what I can do to change the hostility that's going on. And sometimes people are just very sarcastic in the way they talk, and that unfortunately is just how they are. So I like to step away, look at the situation, look what started the situation, and sometimes I've been known to go to a manager and say, okay, here's what just happened. I need someone to look at it from a different viewpoint and maybe help me with suggestions on how to really approach this person. And, you know, when you're working with different individuals, you kind of have an understanding of how they are. And so you have to really kind of think about that when you're formulating your attack on the issue. And people that are more passive aggressive tend to be, you know, people that are just, they like to make jokes and they like to make fun of issues because they don't really want to deal with the issues. So sometimes, like I said before, having a third person come in to try and help the situation also kind of takes that down a notch.
Okay, that's great. Okay, our next question says, are there any good ways to help employees change roles without the conflict that seems to often go along with that type of change?
Say that one more time because you kind of cut out for a second. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Are there any good ways to help employees change roles without the conflict that goes along with that type of change?
Well, I think when you have employees changing their roles or positions or kind of what they're doing to do something else, I think the key to it is trying to be very clear as to why the change is happening. You know, if it's an organizational change and it's something that is just happening all over the place, they need to understand where it's coming from. A lot of people tend to get conflicted about that because they feel like their role or their position is being changed because of something they did and not realizing that there are bigger things in play than themselves. So I think in that situation, you always want to make sure to give them the most accurate information that you're able to do. And if it's simply, you know, the organization has decided to change their structure, and because of that, certain roles are changing and certain people are going to be doing this and they're going to be doing that, then it's really important to make sure that they understand that and that it's not about their job performance. It's just about how the organization is restructuring for what's going on today.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Our next question says, poor communication between leadership and employees is a big issue at my workplace. We've been trying to counter this by having more meetings. Are there any other things we could try to deal with this issue?
Well, I know that what I tend to like to do is when there's poor communication that's going on, it's sometimes you need to have additional maybe like classes, trainings where everyone in the management team can take these trainings to become a little bit more effective with the way they're communicating. Because if you think about it, most of us think that we communicate pretty well and that we don't have a problem with communication. It's always somebody else's issue.
Right.
And what I've really kind of found is that when you set up additional training where everybody can be involved in that training, all the management team, they can pick up tricks and they can pick up different ways of communicating, maybe different wording. You know, and also what I found too is that role playing a little bit also helps the situation as well, because it makes somebody step out of themselves and walk in that other person's shoes and be open to going, wait a minute, you know, maybe I wasn't communicating as effectively as I could have and I just saw it. And sometimes it takes stepping out of that person's shoes to see that.
Good point. That's really good. Okay, the next question says, many companies that I've worked for have encouraged competition as a way to drive results. Would you say that this is a negative way to get positive results?
I don't know that I would say it's negative. I do know that when you have a lot of competition, that can create a lot of issues because not a lot of people are very competitive. There's, you know I've personally been around some very competitive people. They do not like to lose no matter what. And they will run over their mother if they have to in order to achieve that goal. And then you have other people that they're competitive, but they're not willing to do, you know, kind of above and beyond to hurt somebody else's feelings. So, you know, I think it is a good thing because competition does kind of make people be a little bit more accountable than what they probably would have been. It's just, unfortunately, some people take it a little bit too far. And because of that, people can get kind of hurt feelings over it.
Right. Okay. Okay, next question says, how can I help my employees keep their professional relationships and communication from causing conflict on a personal level?
The big thing with that is that people need to be reminded that while they're at work, even if they're best friends with half their team, at work it's about work. And, you know, you can't bring your personal issues inside of work. And you've got to remember, again, the focus is clear. When you're at work, you're there to do a job, and it's not something personal. And people can't and need to know that they can't make it personal. And that's often the hardest thing to do, because when you're friends outside of work, the lines get very blurred. And so my suggestion would be to make sure that you are always having communication with all of the team and keeping it very professional, and know that, you know, everybody's got lives and there's always this struggle between work and personal, how to balance, but you can't make it personal. And it's the hardest thing to get people to realize, because they're going to sit there and say, well, I'm not making it personal, when every kind of dagger that's being thrown is on a personal nature, because they know that other person way too well. Right. So you've got to make sure that they understand, when we're here each and every day, this is the goal that we're going for. If there are issues that come about, you need to try and deal with them yourselves. And if you find that you can't do that, then definitely come get me, because I'm going to be able to handle that for you. And the manager needs to not be afraid to handle the easy things or the tough things.
Okay, what would you say are the 2 or 3 biggest takeaways that people could take from today's webinar?
To make sure that you want to be open-minded when going into any situation. that is a huge key, that you don't want to make things personal. And when you find things getting tough, it's best to kind of step away from the situation a moment, look at what's going on, and find a more effective way to communicate with that person or those individuals that you're having issue with. There's always another way to deal with something, or there's always another way to deal with it better than maybe what you started dealing with. And we all have the ability to kind of change it from a negative to a positive.
Fantastic. Thank you, Melissa, for that, for those questions and answers. I appreciate that. Again, I would encourage everyone to check out Melissa's website at desertleadership.com. There is full information there on this program on resolving conflict in the workplace, as well as many others, and the services that Desert Leadership provides. We really appreciate everyone who joined us today, and thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. And Melissa, thank you so much for today's presentation.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, take care.